You're listening to the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast with Matt, where we talk about hunting, shooting, fishing, camping, and everything else that the great outdoors has to offer. Let's get into it. All right. We've started the new year, but reflecting on 2025 and the end to it has been pretty ordinary because the atrocity that occurred at Bondi and then the steps the government have put in place afterwards have been nothing short than just, I don't even have words for it, to punish all the law-abiding firearms owners in a knee-jerk reaction and what seems to be like a gun grab. And I was thinking, I've got to address the topic. I've got to get a podcast out there. Who better than someone that spent a vast majority of their life looking at what happened at Port Arthur and very similar circumstances with what happened with the firearm new legislation that came in at the time. So, mate, you're back, and this is you're probably sitting here going, hey, this is just a repeat of the history.
Well, here we are at the end of 2025, and we all thought, look, everything's sorted, the gun laws are working. You know, there's been some criminal activity and stuff, but, we've been able to get some good firearm collections going on, all that stuff. And to quote Al Pacino in Godfather 3, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. So here we are again, end of 2025, and our esteemed Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has just done the typical knee-jerk, he's pulled a John Howard and, decided to step up to the plate and be a stalwart PM and tackle the problem head-on, the law-abiding shooters again. So I don't know about you, but I am sick and tired of this bullshit. But rather than rant and rail about it, I've certainly done a couple of episodes on the WASP Files, which is the channel that I run about the Port Arthur massacre, which has been running for 12 months and garnered nearly 3 million views. I did a special report on Bondi just correlating the two massacres because they do have uncomfortable parallels, particularly in relation to the government response to current gun reforms. I don't like to call them gun reforms. They are restrictive gun laws. That's basically what they are, gun bans and confiscations. So I did the two episodes, and there has been a storm of dissent and debate, understandably, given on the surface, the political nature of the attack. But it is an outrage, and rather than just rant and rail, I've begun a campaign of spearheading a direct attack on the government and the powers that be against this draconian legislation that's been rammed through in the New South Wales Parliament before Christmas. Now, just to clarify so that everyone can rest a tad easy, the legislation that was passed after a so-called marathon session in Parliament of 17 hours, and it was passed primarily by the bipartisanship vote of the Liberals and Labor. Interestingly enough, the Greens abstained from voting, and they're typically sort of anti-gun, so that was interesting. But the legislation has not reached what they call royal assent, which means it's got to be passed on to the Governor-General, and then it has to be enacted into law. So far, New South Wales has passed it in the Houses, but it hasn't been given royal assent. The other states, there hasn't been any movement. There's been a lot of discussion about how they're going to handle it, and most of the states are seeking to have a more considered consultative approach, unlike Chris Minn's dismissive and brusque stance on just ignoring consultation with all the heads of the major firearm supporting bodies and the voices of law-abiding shooters, and he's just decided we're going ahead and we're doing this. And I guess these people have forgotten that they work for us, not the other way around. So I'll be spearheading. I have already begun speaking to the heads of CIFA, NIWA, Shooters Union, SSAA, and just being vocal online, but I've got a 10-point plan which is a staunch approach to defeating these laws and halting them in their tracks.
All right. Well, I'm curious to hear that because there's a lot been going on in the background, and I think a couple of things just to add on to what you were saying there. So disappointing about Chris Minns because if you go back 6 weeks ago prior to this, he was pushing for the hunting and conservation bill. He was fully supportive of recreational hunters, opening up more land, giving them more to do our part in reducing feral pests and helping out communities, especially our rural ones. And then this happened, and he's just done an absolute complete backflip. Interestingly, when you said about the Greens there, you are correct. They refused to vote and they walked out. A lot of people, I've seen some interesting posts saying that they're on our side. And the actual reason they walked out was because the laws didn't go far enough with firearms. They don't want any recreational hunting, period. And I want people to make sure they understand this because I saw a few people say, oh, they didn't vote against these laws, they're on our side. And that's definitely not the case. We need to understand they don't want any hunting. So they are definitely not supporting us. They were not happy that these laws didn't go far enough. I have absolutely no idea where these numbers came from. It makes zero sense to me restricting recreational hunters to 4 rifles and target shooters to 10. I have no idea. Interestingly, people are talking about analogies and pushing forward to the public. And I think this is something we need to address and get better at consistently as a group. And one of the analogies I consistently keep saying is that you don't play around a golf, and if you only had 4 clubs, you couldn't play. Look, as a golfer, that's not correct. I can play a round of golf with 4 clubs. I could use my driver, my hybrid, my 7-iron, and my putter, and I could get the job done. It wouldn't be as good, and I wouldn't play as well as if I had my full set of clubs. However, it can be done. And I think that's an analogy we need to stop using. The next one, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this. There is a legal challenge, and there's a couple of different platforms raising money for, I think it's Richard McDonald. So he owns McDonald Law. Very experienced, has a lot of knowledge in the firearms industry, he's worked with the police previously. So he's quite experienced. The fundraising seems to be the big push for him to challenge it. Now, I'm not 100% that will do anything. I'm not sure, and I'll be completely honest. I think, as you said, the Governor General is the one. I don't know if there's a legal standing, and I know in a post he wrote, because I follow him and I like what he does. He said that there's no sort of, that's what we need to get to. We need to have these legal questions asked if it's illegal what they're doing. Now, my concern is a couple-fold. I think that we've done a really, really bad job of our marketing to the general public. People are scared of guns here in Australia. They have absolutely no idea, including our Premier that referred to belt-fed shotguns. Absolutely no clue what's going on. But I've had a lot of conversations as of late with non-firearm people about these laws. And I saw a poll the other day, I can't remember, I think it was on Channel 7, that they said 80% agree to these new firearm laws. Now, I actually think that's probably about accurate. Now, the reason I think it's accurate is because the general population have no idea about firearms and what they do, why they're required, or what they're needed. And I think that we've really dropped the ball as a shooting community, that we should be, our governing bodies, our bigger bodies should be putting ads on TV, ads on social media, doing a far better job of getting it out there to the people, not to hunters. We don't need to change hunters' opinions. We do need people who are non-hunters to have an understanding about firearms, because the knee-jerk reaction this Premier's done is because the voting base agrees with it. And whether we like that or not, and I don't like it, let's be very clear, the general population has no idea about guns and they're scared of guns. So this is, for them, they're sitting there going, I think this is a good idea. That is probably our biggest problem, I feel anyway, because when you write letters, we did a heap, but I think this has probably been the best I've ever seen the shooting community, a hunting community, get together and write letters to ministers and things like that. We had 2 issues there, is everyone was using the same template, and that was even referenced in Parliament. I can't remember where he was from, but the gentleman that got up and said, I got the same, basically cut and paste letter. That just shows laziness. I've always been against letters like that, especially in the day of AI. you can just punch it in and say, hey, change this to my tone to the blah, blah, blah. So I think we're at a crossroads because I can't see these being reversed here in New South Wales. I'm all for the legal action by all means. I don't know if it's going to achieve anything. I think that we need to do a far better job, and our shooting bodies, they need to take note of this, and they need to start doing some damn marketing, spend some money to try and convince people that are no idea that to not be scared of guns, to not be scared of guns in the hands of good people, because all that we've seen is even the wording. As soon as the Bondi attack, Minns and Albanese, they were saying, are we going to see stricter gun laws? We're punishing people who do the right thing. And I made reference to it, and I said, I definitely don't want this, so please don't take this out of context. I said, because this gentleman was Muslim, would we never let any Muslims hold a gun? I think that's discrimination. I wouldn't be comfortable with that. Instead, we've gone a step further and said any law-abiding firearm owner, we're going to punish you for the sake of this two idiots who, mind you, I think there's a lot of issues here going in. What's happened from a regulatory point of view is how they even had firearms licenses. But it's, mate, the WASP files could be, the Bondi files coming forward as well, because there could be two parts here. It is so, when you start to unpack how these guys had, how the father had a gun license, how he was on a student visa, how he had no permanent home address, just little thing. His son was on a watch list. I sit there and go, how the hell were they allowed to keep their guns? You have an argument at a party and your guns get taken from you for 28 days. Like, I just don't get it.
Well, it's astounding. I actually didn't know that you don't need to be an Australian citizen to have a gun licence. Now, under my understanding, you need to be a citizen in America to get a gun licence. I was astounded at that. Obviously, people are aware of the information that's been raised that ASIO had full knowledge of the son associating with known radical elements, and that he was monitored for something like 6 months. And the father, Sajid, had applied for a firearms license, but because he didn't provide any photographic identification, his license was refused. And then in 2023, he was granted the license. Now, this is after the intelligence agency, and I'll use that term a little loosely, were aware of Navid's activities in relation to potential radical Islamic associations. So there are some very serious questions being asked about what the intelligence agencies knew, the failure of communication, whether they passed that information on to counter-terrorism police, whether that made its way to the firearms component of the New South Wales Police. All of these questions, of course, everyone is screaming, justifiably so, for a royal commission into the Bondi attacks, so that we can get to the bottom of the failure, and also the government's ineptitude, incompetency, and inactivity in relation to the rise of anti-Semitism activity in Australia, certainly in New South Wales, but also their policy of just having this open door mass immigration. And we've obviously seen that there have been cases where there hasn't been proper vetting, and we've let in some very dangerous people that have conducted terrorist activity on Australian shores that have led to losses of life. I want to sort of stop a little bit and go back in terms of the fight. There are moves underway, and I'm certainly going to help assist in every way I can. One of them is this, using my abilities and capacities as a media person and a filmmaker to create as much educational material as I can, and pro-gun promotional material, and flood social media. It is time to turn public sentiment around. I don't agree with the polls that have been presented. Firstly, no one should trust mainstream media. They are just basically corrupt liars who are in lockstep with the government. Polls, are usually lauded as being an example of the public sentiment, and they're hardly that. They will interview maybe 1,000 people in very specific demographics and get the answers that they want. We don't even know if they've been verified or not. So I don't think it was anywhere near 76 or 80%. they'll only just, if they, for instance, poll in the inner city, what about all the rural people and people from all over Australia who would, clearly support firearms, but you get these inner city, latte sipping types that will just judge firearms. But that's yet to be determined. But I don't trust polls, and no one should trust polls. This fight, let me be very clear about this. It is time to say no. We have done everything to comply. It is quite obvious since the 29 years since the Port Arthur massacre that the only issue with firearm crime in Australia has stemmed from the criminal fraternity and from the homegrown terrorist aspect. Law-abiding shooters have done the right thing. They have carried on their recreational, sporting, and even very strong conservation element of their right to possess firearms. And we are not to blame and should never be to blame. And so now it is time to say no. And part of the campaign, which I'm going to be assisting with, will be a 10-point plan, and it is a direct rebuttal and resistance to the confiscation of firearms and these laws. It will have to entail a unified, well-funded High Court challenge, probably start in the Supreme Court first, but we need a High Court challenge. There are certainly definite aspects of discrimination, possibly even libel in relation to targeting law-abiding shooters as being potential criminals. And one of the main arguments I'm going to push that it is time for us to consider that firearm ownership is a right, not a privilege. We have the right, if we want to go and buy a car, we'll buy a car. We need a license to do that. Once they give you a license, you can drive a car. You want to buy a house, that is a right. If you want to buy any personal property, as a free citizen, you are entitled to that right. They have given us a license. Once they've given you a license, and that license can be in any capacity, whether it's a collector's license, a target shooting license, you then have the legal right to purchase that property. Now, if they decide they're just going to override that, then I guess, in my opinion, that is unconstitutional. It is a right, not a privilege. And we've got to start the message to push out there to the public that that's the case. The media and the government are running with the doctrine that, we're on tender hooks. That's not the case. Shooters have been a part of Australian culture since its inception. And it's time to turn this around. It's time to fight. In regards to the legal challenges, I believe that there are very, very strong cases, and I have been doing a lot of research into this, that the government and the authorities are potentially liable for criminal negligence charges. Their failure is on their watch. They were aware of these potential perpetrators, these alleged perpetrators. They had the information. All the safeguards are in place to prevent unfit and improper persons from holding firearm licenses, and they failed and gave them a license. Now, that led to direct harm to the Australian community, and that is grounds for charges of criminal negligence. And in my opinion, that should be held over their head as a potential Damocles sword to say, if you proceed with this anti-gun legislation, you're going to be charged with criminal negligence. The same applies to having a civil lawsuit, a mass class action by law-abiding shooters, licensed firearm business owners, to say, listen, I'm going to sue you because you're going to negatively impact my business unjustifiably, unreasonably, and in my opinion, unlawfully. So I'm going out, if you'll pardon the puns, guns blazing.
Yeah, look, I'm fully supporting everything you're saying here because as a law-abiding firearms owner that has done nothing wrong, has a very clean history, I just sit there and go, why is it that the knee-jerk reaction from the government is to take away our firearms? Whether you have one, whether you have two, whether you have 10, whether you have 20, what is the difference if they have vetted you, if you have a license to hold it, and you have never done the wrong thing? So that really annoys me because to say And I look, this is where statistics. I'm right. I agree with you about polls and mainstream media. Don't trust anything they say. They're so full of crap. It's not funny. But I look at it and go, let's look at some of the details, because they've been throwing it around saying there's more guns now than there was when Port Arthur happened. Well, that's incorrect, because the actual percentage compared to population is actually lower. So that's the first thing. Yes, if you go on a numerical value, there are, I think roughly they said 4 million guns in Australia. Compared to Port Arthur, there was a lot lower. Of course, our population has significantly grown since then too. Now, my next one is, if we've got 4 million guns, well, why aren't they been the problem up until this point? Why is it, if we've got 4 million guns in Australia, that we've had one terrorist incident, and they're terrorists? Let's be clear. This is not just some shooting, some random thing. They did it as an act of terror. Why then are we putting all firearms owners in the same bucket as these two scumbags and saying, sorry, you can't have a firearm? You've had them the whole time and we haven't had an issue. But now, because something has happened by two terrorists, we now have a problem. It really annoys me, and it just, as you said, it's discrimination against law-abiding people. I hope the challenge goes really well, and I hope, I know I will do everything in my power to help out where possible, because I think you're right. Enough is enough. We sit here and see these politicians consistently rot the system. I think the Vic Premier went over somewhere, and she spent a couple of $100,000 on flights and dining and things like that. You've got ones up here that, they just claim back everything. It's ridiculous on how much money they waste of taxpayer money. Talk about the machete bins last night, New Year's Eve, or the night before New Year's Eve. I think there was a mass casualty event with machetes somewhere there in Victoria. But how we spent 34 million off the top of my head, or 42 million off the top of my head, for Jacinta to put in machete bins to hand them in and ban them. Well, that didn't work. And the reason these things don't work is because criminals don't follow the rules. That's why they're criminals. But instead, we want to punish the people that do the right thing. It's just such a dumb way to look at it. But again, I think it's all for votes. And I think this is one of the issues that we have, is that we don't have a really strong political party that is for guns. Now, yes, we've got shooter farmer fishers, but realistically, they are not federal. They are based in New South Wales only. They have 2 seats. They're not that strong as a political party. If we don't have a national one that then flows down into the states that actually has some significant power, I think we're going to be in more and more trouble going forward. And look, I don't know what your thoughts are here. With this tragedy occurring, I do think that One Nation is going to pick up a lot of support. And I do think that that's probably where shooters should be turning to and looking to holistically to get some power back for the law-abiding firearms owner.
Let's cut to the chase in relation to why there is this, I would say, worldwide agenda to restrict firearm ownership from the civilian population. Now, anyone who wants to look it up will know about the United Nations Agenda 2030, which was once called Agenda 2021, which was a blueprint, in essence, for a new world order, a lovely, utopian, harmonious, balanced world where there's no poverty and everything is controlled and peaceful. And a very clear aspect, I believe it's Charter 16, on the United Nations Agenda 2030 is the removal of firearms from the civilian population. That's a total disarmament of civilian population of small arms. Now, there is an estimated 1 billion firearms in the world. 2030 is 4 years away. So how are they going to achieve this wonderful agenda? It all sounds wonderful and peaceful. The only problem is that the downside of that is control over the population. So the United Nations, which was once a very honourable organisation formed after the World Wars to be able to mediate conflict, has become a corrupted entity. And through them, there have been machinations to yes, disarm the civilian population and place very draconian controls over everything from our free speech, our ability to be free to move in case of things like the pandemic, and certainly with the ability to own firearms in some countries, whether it's to defend your life, liberty, and home, or just to be able to have them for recreational purposes. So this is all deliberate. Our leaders, for the most part, are puppets. I'm going to be a little philosophical and go out on a limb and say that Australia has a long time ago been sold down the river. These people are running to the drumbeat of somebody else. That's why you've got this refusal by Chris Miles and Chris Minns and Anthony Albanese to even state that radicalised Islamic terrorism is the threat. They'll come out and start pointing fingers at right-wing extremists who, despite their vocal and at times physical altercations during protest and so on, are not the people out there opening fire on the Jewish community or on the Australian public, and yet they're targeted straight away. So you can see what's going on. They're running a playbook saying, these are the bad guys over here. But why aren't they mentioning it? Why, in God's name, will the AFP commissioner not make a statement that the Bondi attacks were not religious in nature? That is just an obscenity. That person should resign on the spot or be sacked. It is quite clearly a religiously based attack. The perpetrators had the black ISIS flag in their car. They'd also had improvised explosive devices which they had thrown into the crowd to try and kill more people, and luckily they did not go off. They had explosives in their car. This is obviously a radicalised, religiously based terrorist attack, and yet our authorities are shirking away. They're diverting attention towards gun ownership, and the logical progression of thought is that this is deliberate. It doesn't matter about them. People say, oh, they're idiots, they're incompetent. No, they're not. These are very smart people that make a lot of money being in politics, rorting a system, travel routes, whatever. But there is an agenda here. There is a much higher agenda, and it's to control the population, to bring in a new world order, a one government world, mass immigration. You can argue the point. I believe it's been used as a vanguard to destabilise particularly Western nations from the inside out. You know, just look at the extreme terrorist attacks that have taken place all over the world, in Europe, in America, and now on Australian shores. We never had this problem. So our leaders are not to be trusted. They are owned. They are mouthpieces for a higher agenda. So this is why firearm ownership, and you can argue this point. In my opinion, it is a fundamental right, and I do believe that civilian populations need the right to be able to defend themselves against tyranny and dictatorship. It looks like Australia's very clearly going down that path. That's my personal opinion. Take it for what it is.
I think there's a couple of things there to unpack, and I agree with you regarding how disappointed I am in the Prime Minister of not being able to point the finger at Islamic extremists, because, as you said, I think he had a 5,000 word speech, and not once did he bring up that they were related to ISIS, as in the sense that they had studied, they had the flag, that was their goal. Instead pointing to right-wing extremism, which is quite concerning when it's almost, we do see this, it's like a magician, isn't it? We'll show you something over here with the right hand while the left hand's sneakily doing something that you're not aware of. It's that distraction. And I do think that is definitely what is going on here. And I think that is the exact reason these bills were rushed through, is that's a distraction of something larger coming, because it's only New South Wales. I'm interested to see what happens with the other states, because it just doesn't make sense with no... Well, I sit there and I think the reason being, I think they wanted to see... I feel that it's a test case. What happens in this state if we do this, and what's the reaction? Are we going to lose votes? Are we going to lose popularity? Are we going to lose control? Whatever it might be. And I think it's like the stepping stone. We did that in WA. And then the first thing that was referenced was the WA gun limits, and Chris Minns saying that we need to go stricter than those gun limits that WA enforced. And it's almost like these little chip away, chip away, chip away, and let's see how far we can push the envelope without that full pushback from the public. That's how I perceive it in what they're doing. Now, this is where it gets really hard for firearms owners, because when it initially happened, we saw straight away people going, let's do a march, let's do a protest. I am very nervous about those because it takes a small minority in that protest to do the wrong thing, and then everybody gets labeled the same. That always concerns me. If you're a conspiracy theorist, you might even go further and say, hey, is there plants in there deliberately making people look bad? So that's something that I like to think about. But the majority of people don't want to probably do it. And I know I wouldn't want to do it, in the sense that because I have a job, I have a career, I have things that I probably can't get in trouble for. And I've got no issue with that. They're the decisions I made. But doing a protest might actually have worse impact on my ability to hold a firearms license to be able to do what I love. So it's a really tricky one in how we go about this. I know the word keeps getting thrown around that it's a fight, and I'm not in a disagreement with that, but it's a real tricky one is how does everybody come together to be able to address this? And then you said everyone has different opinions, and that's completely fine, because we're not all the same and we don't want to be all the same. And everyone has different opinions on how we should do this fight. Now, I love the fact that you said, as with your background being in media, in actually putting things out on social media and some ads and things like that to change the perception of people that don't own firearms, or don't know people that own firearms. Or the best one I saw, I think it was the Sydney Morning Herald, that they had a map up and you could put your address in and it would tell you how many firearms are around you. Okay, but if they've always been around you, you didn't even know about it. What's the issue?
Mm-hmm.
But I that's how I interpreted that media article straight away. But talking to mates that don't have firearms, they bought hook, line, and sinker the avenue and perspective that Daily Telegraph or Sydney Morning Herald or whoever it was pushing, saying that, oh my God, there's so many, that's dangerous. And I was like, yeah, but hold on, they were always there, but people weren't thinking like that. It's very interesting. I think that's where we need to do a better job personally, is that those people that the media are pushing with this narrative, we need the opposite push to say, hey, the guns were always there. You didn't even know about them. That means it's safe and it's working, because people don't jump to that, especially with the rhetoric that the media are pushing.
Mainstream media is dying. It was once a very honourable tradition. I like to liken it now to a rat gnawing on a carcass. The mainstream media work in lockstep with the government. So the idea is the government wants to push some kind of agenda, whether their own or whether it's imposed from foreign entities. So they use the media, and the media does all this reporting and polls and so on. And then that justifies the government saying, oh, because of the public sentiment that's reported in the media, we're now going to implement this legislation. We are corrupted to the core. So the problem is that, yes, turning public sentiment around is great, and social media is certainly giving mainstream media a run for its money. People don't trust the mainstream media anymore. They are liars, and they're going elsewhere. They're going to people who speak on podcasts that are popular for their information. Of course, social media is also being tainted and corrupted, so it's very hard to know what to believe, what's true, what isn't. AI has come along and thrown a big spanner in the works there as well. The only way, in my opinion, this battle is going to be won, and that I'm talking about for our very freedoms, the freedoms of our soul, certainly for the reclamation of our once great nation, is that it has to be won politically, it has to be won legally, and it also has to be funded with a massive war chest. There has to be a united front from all shooting fraternities and the main bodies to put together High Court constitutional challenges in relation to any proposed activity. Part of that should be immediate drafting, which I'm looking into now, of preemptive legislation and injunctions to be placed on the Victoria Police or the New South Wales Police, or, well, it's probably a little late there, though it hasn't reached loyal assent, to be able to stop this in its tracks, that they can't go and do anything until there is a court case. And then that needs to be delayed, and then there needs to be a proper process. We need to stop this in its tracks. You're right that protests, basically, look, petitions don't work. They get ignored because our politicians are corrupt. They don't care. They don't care if there's plus 100,000 people marching on Parliament House. They're just going ahead and doing what they want to do. That's what we need to stop. There needs to be a forced acknowledgement of the fact that they must be consultative in approach, that they can't just go ahead and do whatever they want to do, which just seems to be the case. They are blatantly, transparently ignoring the needs of the people. And yes, we can rant and rail. We all sit there and go, oh, we hate our politicians. Oh, they're idiots. They're bastards. We vote them in because we have very little choice on who we can vote in and who our preferences go to. But unfortunately, politics is something that can be used, and it is the will and the voice and the might of the people that needs to change. Education is a part of that. But it is really time to stand up and resist. I don't condone violence at all, but I suggest that Australia is on the path to being, up there with one of the most corrupt nations on earth. We need to really turn this around and take our country back and take our power back as the people who elect these draconian leaders, these tyrants. Certainly Victoria is going through the most horrendous crime rates. The surge in crime, violent crime, which is going unchecked, is just purely related to the policies of the Allen government, proceeding on from the Andrews government. They have destroyed Victoria. But I don't want to rant anymore. I want to fight them. If I have my way, Albanese will be removed from his position as Prime Minister. And the same goes with any leader that is attempting to destroy the very fabric of the Australian culture, to treat us like we're just meat that they will do what they will pound away with a tenderizer on, and there's nothing we can do about it. This has to be a spirited fight. You can see I'm passionate about it. I'll do everything in my power, but what I need and what I'm asking in this case, every law-abiding firearm owner to do is get up off your ass and don't take this sitting down. It's time to fight. That does mean writing personal letters to your MPs. It does mean getting involved in class actions. It does mean everything you can do, getting on social media, filming yourself, and basically having your viewpoint heard. We've got to fight. That's what it is. And, I'm not afraid of the consequences, because the consequences of not fighting are even worse. Evil flourishes when good men do nothing. It's time to stop doing nothing and start fighting back.
So I look at it and go, if Albanese steps down, is there going to be a change? I don't think so. I don't think it matters whether it's the Labor Party or the Liberal Party. I think they're both the exact same in different colours. So this is where I've had a lot of discussions with quite a few people in the space of how do we get a political party that can overthrow the two majors? How do we get a political party that actually has some juice? Because we haven't seen that. We don't have a third option. Without a third option, without options that make the two majors actually sit and take note, I think we're in big trouble. And I think that even with the legal fighting and the voices, I don't think the government really cares. I don't think I think a perfect example would be, let's look at Bondi from a different perspective. Let's talk about a social media ban for under 16s, which in light when this horrific incident in Bondi occurred, guess how the police tried to tell everybody to get out of the area? Through social media. So what, we didn't care about our under 16s because they couldn't get that message anymore. When you had the Prime Minister sitting there and interviewing I think it was a principal and a school student, and the school student turned around and said how dumb they were. He used that on his own social media, and Australian Labor Party used it on their social media, saying that everyone supports it. She literally said to his face, these rules are dumb and kids will find a workaround, which we saw them do because within the first 2 days, little known apps skyrocketed because they're not on the ban list. Again, I just don't think they care. I think that everything is smoke and mirrors. And if we don't, if we can't get a political party to challenge this, then we're just going to constantly have the same in and day out. And I've raised this. I know I raised this when I had a couple of different politicians on the podcast and talking about all the little parties coming together and having a coalition. And I think this is the time. I think One Nation and the Nationals are more aligned than ever before. You've seen Barnaby Joyce go over to One Nation, who was, a very big player in the Nationals. You've got all these smaller parties that realistically, like Libertarian, like Shooter Farmer Fishers, there's all these smaller parties that scrapple for these votes. They're going for the same people and trying to get a little bit of power. This is the time that we start to remove some of these smaller ones and get more bigger ones. I feel I think that's the only way forward for me. Definitely with all the legal precedents and challenges and things you've been talking about. But do they really care? Because who's going to be paying the bill for the government to go to court? It's the taxpayers. They don't care. They waste money left, right, and center because it's not their money. It's our money. Now, we have to then try and find more money to mount the defense, which they don't really care about because they're paying for it with not their money, which is, again, our money. So we're paying for this fight to occur. Now, I'm not saying it shouldn't occur. Don't get me wrong. But I want to try and have people start thinking about what are all the options, because I don't want to see us put all the eggs in one basket. We do these legal challenges and it all fails and we're worse off than when we started. Now, I don't say that might not happen. Let's be clear. I don't know. I can't predict the future. But I think we should have a multi-pronged attack and that we need to be addressing these issues from all different angles. And for once, trying to be ahead of the game rather than reacting, because it is very clear that the politicians don't care, that they're happy for good people to suffer or to lose. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but New South Wales, obviously being someone that lives in New South Wales, our PTAs were just frozen. Now, I have a great issue with this because there are a lot of people, even if these new laws, the bill that's been passed, even if these new laws do come in, there are a lot of people that don't have 10 firearms as a target shooter, but they now can't buy a firearm. Well, why? Legally, they still can. Legally, they should be able to get a PTA and do that. Why is that stopped? What impact's that now going to have on our dealers? Because they can't sell any firearms at the moment because all PTAs in New South Wales have stopped. So when you talk about class actions and things like that, that definitely needs to occur because these poor dealers and firearms owners and things like that are really copping the raw end of the deal here with no just thought from the government, because I don't think they actually care.
Yeah, look, I guess I agree with you. I've put together what I call a 10-point plan. Part of that is you're right. Politically, we do have a lot of surging independent parties. One Nation certainly picked up a lot more support, and they are pro-gun, and they do resist these laws. The Nationals as well. So part of the plan I put forward was that on this issue particularly, they can put political differences aside and unite to form, in essence, a very powerful political pro-gun lobby, and to take a punitive approach to our major powers, Liberal and Labor, and say, if you want to get any cross legislation passed, sorry, you're going to have to deal with a unified front in relation to firearm ownership in the country. We know that the deck has been stacked very much towards the left on the political topography. Now you're starting to see a resistance towards that, and people now leaning towards a more conservative approach. So there is a political battle, there always will be, but you're right, we're stuck with either Liberal or Labor, and they are, two sides of the same coin. But yes, a powerful, united front is what we really need. Everyone needs to unite. All the big organisations like CIFA and SSAA can put together a massive war chest to be able to fight things legally for an education of the general public. I've put forward a proposal speaking to all of those organisations. If I have a modicum of funding, I will create very slick, very poignant, very reasoned, very civil and very powerful pro-gun messages, and then basically flood social media with these. Yeah, we can do television campaigns as well. It's time to reach the people and use the money that these organisations have to bring the fight to the government. And certainly, harass, delay, obstruct, everything you can do legally to prevent them doing what they're going to do. Just to make sure that if there are injunctions in place, nothing can happen if there is an injunction in place, and that can be brought by a civilian. If need be, I'll bring my own personal injunction against Victoria Police from confiscating my firearms. Because there are, with the under 16 ban, there have been 2 individuals that have issued a High Court challenge to the under 16 internet ban. So it can be a David against Goliath, but that is certainly big things come from little changes sometimes. Things in Australia will change. They need to change, and they are. And the only way that's going to happen is if basically people start to, on all fronts, as you say, begin the process of that change. And yeah, our adversarial Commonwealth government system is flawed, deeply flawed. So getting political as best we can to try and get a balance of power that will hold, as Don Chip said, keep the bastards honest, that will hold our powers to account is the only thing we can do politically. But deals are made behind closed doors in Parliament, and the more politically astute we are in terms of electing officials that support all of our rights for freedoms, not just firearm rights, the better it will be for Australia in general.
I agree. I think we really need to come together. I don't know how that happens, because there's a lot of people that, if you were, so for example, if we were to lose Libertarian and shoot a farmer fisher and it all gets swallowed up by One Nation, then the people who have the power in those don't have the power anymore, and they're not going to want to give away that. So that will never happen. I think this is where we need to work together as best possible, but we're never going to be able to do it completely together. Like, I don't think that we talk about, you mentioned before having this utopia, the United Nations and Agenda 2030, where all countries have the same law, there's no poverty, et cetera, et cetera. I feel that's a pipe dream that will never be able to occur, because there is people are people, and there's always a lust for whether it be status, power, money, whatever it might be. So what I'm thinking is, here's the problem with when we talk about our bodies coming together and creating a war chest or whatnot. There's always people in positions that want the power, that want the status, that want the money, that want the influence, want the notoriety or the popularity, whatever it might be. And this is where I think we're in for a little bit of a hardship. I don't know how we get around that, because we're never going to. And then additionally to that, I have my own perspectives and thoughts about where we should go. And I know, look, I've said it. I know I've had shooter, farmer, fisher, representatives on the podcast. Will I be voting their way? Probably not. I'll be honest. I think they're too small. I don't think they're making enough of an impact. And I think these laws show that they are nowhere near as strong or influential as they think in New South Wales government. I'm happy to say that. I'll tell them that to their face. Let's be real. It's not something that I'm hiding from. But that's my opinion. Not saying it's right or wrong, but that's my opinion. And I think we have a far better option with someone like One Nation personally. Libertarian, I like a lot of their policies. I like less government, but again, they're too small. I don't think that they've got the power. I do like what John Ruddick proposed, getting all the smaller parties together to make some sort of, I hate to use the word coalition, because we've got a coalition generally with Liberal and Nationals, but that's essentially what it was, and not fighting each other for votes and working sort of together. Obviously, all the ideals are not the same, and the policies aren't the same, things like that. So that's a bit of an issue. Problem is there's people of the other opinion that think we all should be jumping on board and supporting Shooter Farmer Fishers Party. And they're entitled to that opinion. I personally don't think that's the way to go from my perspective, looking into it and where I feel we need to go. But that's just how it is. How do we get these Shooters Union, Australian Recreation Union? There's a good example, right? The Australian Recreation and Shooters Union. I believe that the Australian Rec Union are ex-members of Shooters Union because they didn't like what was going on over there, so they started another. So then we've now got two, buckets trying to take the same amount of water. I feel this happens a lot. Someone doesn't like the ideas of someone else, or there's no change. And there could be legitimate reasons for that. Let's be honest too. I know there's people that get stuck in their ways, that don't want to do anything new or different and want to keep just holding the course when that's not the right way, or other people have a different perspective of where they want to take it. So I completely get why these splits occur and how do you get everybody on the same page working together? Because it sounds like a pipe dream, as I mentioned. It sounds like this Agenda 2030 where everyone's, it's a utopia. There's no poverty. Everyone gets the same, et cetera, et cetera. I can never see that actually occurring because it's not in human nature for that even. So, I don't know how we get that happening.
Yeah, look, I agree with you 100%. Life is chaos, and human beings are the most chaotic of all. They just will not be controlled. We saw a certain aspect of that with COVID, but we also sadly saw people roll over and drink the Kool-Aid, no matter what your beliefs are on that. But yeah, you're right. The hardest thing is to get a unification. Greed is the virus that destroys the entire world and personal agenda, and that's what keeps even the major parties at each other's throats. So it is difficult. It's I won't say it's impossible, but I guess that's what we have to work towards. I think a unified political alternative to the mainstream parties is pretty much the only way. And failing that, well, we have seen a fairly meteoric rise of One Nation, and they've certainly gone through their trials and tribulations since that party's inception. I mean, they threw Pauline Hanson in jail, for God's sakes, for some technical transgression of the rules. So, the power's always going to try and quash the little guy coming up, but the little guy's coming up. I do believe that the Nationals need to pull away from the Liberal Party and go back to being the country party and look after the needs of country and rural people a lot more, and of course align themselves with a party like One Nation and the Libertarian Party, so that they basically shift as much of the power base as they can towards more unified interests that will be, if nothing short of a revolutionary movement in a reclamation of community, family, reasoned values, freedoms. All of those should be things that all these other parties have in common. Even the Greens should start to consider that notion, that it is about freedom, and that the only way to do that is to take that power to provide that freedom away from the people that are not doing it. So these preferences, the preferences are the big problems, are only cutting their own throats. And it's time that all these small parties woke up and just said, this is not the Australia that we want to live in. Look, I personally think they keep this up, there will be a revolution in this country, because we're going further and further down a very dangerous route. No one wants to see that. We certainly don't want to see violence, but we can't keep going the way we're going. And if the political leaders aren't going to tackle the problem, then it's up to the people to rise up and take their country back. A lot of talk about that at the moment. But sort of, I guess we're getting a little philosophical and a bit off the firearm thing, but it's all relative. And I just think whatever anyone can do, there's a lot of us. We need to unite. Part of my approach has always been win by attrition. Sign up new shooters every year, take them along, people who don't understand firearms, take them along to the range. The people that I've taken to the range, have that aversion, go, hey, this is a lot of fun. And I'm at pains to just show them how safe the recreational sport is, and then get them licenses, help them get their licenses, help them purchase firearms, win by attrition. It's going to be a long, hard fight, but that's the only way to do it. The more of us who get that sort of influence and sway, the better it will be for the overall.
My only concern with that, and I've had a lot of chats about this with other people, is if we get the wrong people getting firearms licenses just to pepper the numbers and try and get more people, then I see that being a bigger problem for us in the future. And the reason I say this is because we see the damage that one, terrorist who had a firearms license. Now, I do believe that there was a lot of issues from the government point of view in how he was allowed to get it, keep it, and all the things in between. But if we are just getting people into owning a firearm, and we're getting some of the people that are not in it for good reasons, then that potentially can have blowback in the future that makes it even worse. It's an interesting concept because everyone I talk to, and I always felt the same, is that the more owners, the more firearm owners, the more hunters, the better it would be because you're more powerful for votes from that political sort of sphere. But then there is the other side of the coin that we don't talk about as well. And I think that's one that I've started to think about going, look at the damage one bad person has done to all shooters here, whether you agree or disagree. And we all know where we stand on that. But it still happened. Now, if you flood the market with all these people getting firearms licenses and there's a lot of people that shouldn't have a firearms license in there, that is a problem. Then offset that too is that we now look like, depending how things play out, that they wanted to get rid of NCAT, which is the tribunal for people to appeal to if they, for some reason, lost their firearms license, got their firearms license denied when applying, etc., etc. That's a problem too, because I think everybody should have the right to a fair trial, especially if they're law abiding and they're doing the right thing. I think there's a lot of issues with what we face at the moment and how we go through it. And that's one thing that is really concerning me. Look, I know we're talking a bit about politics. It always annoys me when people say, don't talk about politics. It's one of those fighting subjects. And it's like, well, but you sort of need to, because politics, whatever party is in power, they dictate how you live and what you do. And everything of our day-to-day life is influenced by politics. Now, this is the problem. I think we've got to the point where people can't even just talk about this, that it becomes this fighting nature. And I don't want to see that happen. I encourage everybody out there to talk about politics, to call out bad policy, to call out bad positions. And, I would love to see, look, one nation has their faults. I will 100% admit that. I would love to see, and here's where I don't think it will ever happen. I would like to see Jacinta Price go to One Nation with Andrew Hastie, and those two are the ones that go for Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. I think they are both fantastic individuals. They don't strike me as politicians. Maybe they're just excellent politicians who know how to come across that way. But I look at what they stand for. They have some principles. They bleed for the country. And I know Hastie's has been SAS. And so, like, you look at those guys, both of them, sorry, and I feel that would be. Now, would Pauline Hanson in One Nation ever give that power away? I don't know. And that becomes the problem when I look at all these things and where it's going. But as you said, I think we need to do the best we can to come together as a group to have a fight on all sides. I love your idea of creating things. The concern I have is that is there 20 other people that want to do that? And I've seen it. Look, I've seen people that don't even vote, and yet they're doing political podcasts now just because they're trying to capture likes and popularity. Yet they don't vote. So, like, you sit there and go, hold on, you've openly said on a previous podcast you don't vote, you don't care for politics, but this happens and all of a sudden you really care? Or is it you're just trying to get some popularity and likes? I think that's where, unfortunately, in bad times, you get bad people flow through as well. And I think that's one I've tried to be very mindful. I don't do certain things. A little bit of YouTube. I don't sort of film myself and put it out there. And I'm not going to change that just to try and achieve any sort of different things. So I think we need to be careful of charlatans. I think we need to be making sure that we put support and things towards the right people. And sometimes that can be really, really difficult. I do question places like SSAA. Let's be honest and completely candid here, these new laws, if they come into pass, that is going to make them a heap of money. Their treasure chest is going to go through the roof, because if now everybody has to be a member of SSAA, and they're the largest, they have the ranges. If you're doing target shooting, to have 10 guns instead of just rec hunting for 4, because you want to keep sentimental firearms or whatever it might be, you've got to join probably SSAA. That means to keep that, you've got to do 4 shoots a year. That means more range time. That means more money. I am very aware that from their perspective, from a financial business perspective, they're probably sitting there going, these laws are really good for business. They might not agree with them, but they're really good for business. That becomes a bit of a problem when we're trying to get them to fight and put money into the fight when there's a financial incentive not to. Does that make sense?
It does. Look, I think with regard to your first point, I just want to say you can't insure against bad apples. I go down to the range and I see all types of people from all over the world, firing 338 Lapua Ruger precision sniper rifles. And you're sitting there going, your thoughts are, I don't know who's learning to shoot that rifle and what they're going to do with it. Unfortunately, the time for being, in relation to law-abiding shooters and what's going on, for being restrained and careful is gone. We are in a pretty desperate situation. So I do believe that we have to do everything in our power quite drastically to try and turn all this around. And I guess with the bodies that are meant to represent the shooting fraternities, we do have our criticisms of organisations like SSAA, and they should be held to account. I think that if these laws pass through, if they were to pass through nationwide, the impact negatively on the shooting community as a whole, shooting businesses, finances, would be catastrophic. If there's less shooters, if there's less firearms, if there's less gun dealers, the loss to the economy on that front will be massive. Part of the 10-point plan I'm proposing too is to hold once again a bit of a Damocles sword over the head of the governments, and to put a boycott on all firearm-related conservation tactics and pest control until we get what we want. We need to start sort of holding a candle underneath the government's feet. And yes, we also need to get all of these people and that supposedly support us to unite as best we can to try and stop the infighting and the greed, and just get these people to just understand that their future, their existence relies on our likelihoods and our recreations and our needs to be lawful firearm owners. I can't see any other way. If we just kind of sit back and hope that everything will sort of work out and become kumbaya, it's not going to happen. And we've seen that. You're right, tomorrow somebody could go out with a handgun and open fire on the population, whether they're a terrorist or a criminal, and then suddenly they'll target handguns. Obviously, with these laws, people saying, hang on, what about collectors? Okay, if we can only have 4 firearms and I'm a hunter, but I'm also a target pistol shooter, how does that affect things? All the requirements for competitions and memberships for clubs that do specifically target shooting, they'll go, because they won't be able to get enough people to sustain running a club to be able to hold competitions for people to target shoot. Collectors, of course, well, you can't just collect 4 guns, you need more. So how does that work? All of these things, I don't know, I'm just feeling it's a bit beyond trying to take a calm approach. That doesn't mean flying off the handle, and perhaps I'm coming across fairly passionate about it, but it's just, I just can see the writing on the wall, and I just feel we're reaching pretty desperate times on all fronts. It really is time to take our country back, and I'm sure there's going to be some major protests on January 26th, and also just ensuing into the early new year, where people have had enough. And we can see that the tide does turn in other countries. It's distressing, but look what's happening in the UK and Ireland and Europe. there are some huge amounts of the population rising up against some of these agendas that are being pushed on them, and it's starting to have an impact. Perhaps that's part of the big agenda, is to get ourselves fighting each other at each other's throats. But we're in a situation, we're pretty much at war for our freedoms, and Australia, if we don't do something fast, won't be the country that we love and remember.
Well, I think that's a really good place to probably start to wrap it up. It's been a pleasure to have you on again, mate. Thank you for everything you do and your, I guess, participation in trying to get this out, because I know you are fairly popular and have a large viewer base and whatnot. So I know that's the beautiful thing about social media and things like that. There is a lot of people out there that want to do good and that they are doing the best they can. So I definitely appreciate what you do. If you haven't, I'm sure you've heard about it, but jump over to the WASP Files. Go have a watch of. I'm a big believer in history repeats itself, and we're seeing a lot of things here that are definitely repeating themselves from the Port Arthur massacre. So go check it out. Mate, thank you very much for giving up your time and coming on the show. And yeah, I'll let you wrap it up.
Well, look, once again, I want to thank you as well, because we are voices in the wilderness, but there are more and more of these. So that's what it's all about. I'm not about popularity at all. I could give a damn about that. It's about spreading a message. So people like yourself and myself, it's all about trying to change, trying to push back this huge tide. And I believe it is starting to turn. You can see people waking up. But it is about education. So that's pretty much what I'm about. I have my belief systems like everyone else. But let's see if we can turn this all around and reclaim our beautiful country. I don't mind if it's going to be a progressive nation to a certain extent, but we've lost something very, very precious and dear. And it's time to take that back. And at its fundamental core, that's freedom. And that's what our country should all be about. So please, everyone, don't just sit back and go, okay, cool. No, it's not. It's time to fight.
Love it. And I think my final message for you guys is do whatever is in your power to do. I know there's been a lot of people out there calling for everyone to donate and saying there's only 1% of shooters have donated to the legal fund, etc., etc. Everyone's position is different. Everyone's circumstances are different. Do whatever is in the power for you to do. If you can't afford it, send a letter to your MP. You know, I don't even know if we can contact the Governor General, but I'm going to try and see if I can send an email to her and see what we can do. The more we do, the better, and just keep doing the right thing out there and doing the best we can. All right, guys. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Bye for now. You've been listening to the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast with Matt. Thanks for tuning in and can't wait to catch you next time. But in the meantime, if you want more, you can find it at linktr.ee/Australian Hunting and Beyond. That will give you our YouTube, Instagram, X, Facebook, you name it. We'll catch you next time.